So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, señores y señoras, mesdames et messieurs, esteemed guests. Welcome to this 2025 annual public policy lecture. My name is Alessio Terzi. I'm an assistant professor with the Bennett School of Public Policy, and I will be your host for this evening. The first annual public policy lecture took place in 2018 and is by now firmly established within the crowded panorama of Cambridge talks, having featured distinguished economists like Danny Roderick and Sir Partha Dasgupta, statisticians and machine learning experts like Sir David Spiegelhalter and Neil Lawrence, the CEO of UK RI, Dame Ottolin Laser, and more. And yet today is a very special event. I can say it's a very special event for me because it's actually the first time I managed to attend an annual public policy lecture and to host it, no less. But it's a very special event also because it is the first time that it is hosted by the Bennett School of Public Policy. How many of you had heard of the Bennett School of Public Policy before coming here tonight? Good. Good. I've been trying this game around Cambridge and beyond. And for those that hadn't heard, for the few students that hadn't heard about the Bennett School of Public Policy, it's okay because we are only 4 months young. The Bennett School grows out of the previous Bennett Institute, which has been carrying out interdisciplinary policy-relevant work here in Cambridge since 2018 under the leadership of Professor Michael Kenny and Professor Diane Coyle. With the new school, we will continue with this great work, but our level of ambition is set even higher. Our plan is to become a leading center of excellence for the study and research of public policy in Europe and around the world. So Ricardo, the Kennedy School is warned, we're coming at you. And our ambition is to expand. We already run a well-established MPhil in public policy. Many of our students are here tonight. But we're also planning to launch an MPhil in digital policy starting from next year and a PhD in public policy starting the year after. So do keep an eye on us, sign up to our newsletter, follow us on social media, because as they say, the best is yet to come. So speaking of the best to come, it is time for me to move on to introduce tonight's speaker. Ricardo Hausmann is the Rafik Hariri Professor of the Practice of International Political Economy at the John F. Kennedy School of Government of Harvard University. He's the founder of the Harvard Growth Lab. He's the founder of the research department of the Inter-American Development Bank. It's fair to say that Ricardo founds stuff, and generally those things do quite well. I have known Ricardo for quite a few years now, and I have to say that I was immensely delighted when he accepted our invitation to deliver this year's annual lecture. This is because I think that he embodies, in many ways, the values and the ideals that the ideal policymaker should have. In an era of siloed knowledge and hyper-specialization, Ricardo manages to still be a Renaissance man in a way, driven by sheer curiosity. He joins the dots across disciplines. I remember sitting in one of his courses, Development Policy Strategy, and see him borrow concepts from neuroscience. System 1, System 2, with System 1 being the instinctive and emotional mode of thinking, System 2 being the slower, cold logic. And he was extrapolating this concept to how policy making should be organized or how policy happens in real life. He has been mastering concepts like what he calls the sense of us, that in social psychology is called the in-group bias, and he uses it to understand why certain countries are capable of implementing some policies that eventually lead to prosperity and others are not. I hope he will share some of these insights with us tonight, either in the presentation or in the Q&A. But Ricardo is not only a thinker. Public policy is not only about thinking, it's about doing as well, and he's very much a doer. He has been the Minister of Planning and a member of the central bank of his own Venezuela. He served as the chair of the IMF World Bank Development Committee, and through the Growth Lab, he advises government around the world, both at central and local level, and at city level as well, on how to achieve lasting prosperity. Before we hear from Ricardo, just one last thing in terms of housekeeping. Please note that this event is being photographed and video recorded. We will be capturing the speaker on stage, but be aware that questions from the audience will be picked up. There are no planned fire alarms, so if the fire alarm goes off, it's a real fire alarm, and please use the nearest exit as clearly marked and go to the nearest assembly point. And now, please turn your phones on silence mode as we welcome the speaker of the 2025 Annual Public Policy Lecture, Ricardo. The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Alessio, for the invitation and for that kind introduction. As they say, my father would have appreciated it and my mother would have believed it. I have been struggling on what to say this evening. And since the evening is long, I was going to say some crazy things, but I may say them in the comments later. I am very excited to be here at sort of like the birth of the Bennett School. I think you are the youngest kid in the block. No? I think the Kennedy School might be the oldest kid in the block. I think that our field is ripe for disruption. I think it has not come into itself the way it should. I sometimes joke that the Kennedy School doesn't know if it wants to be the best public policy school in the world or the second best econ department at Harvard. I very much like your motto of the right kind of growth, fairly shared. It's very similar to the goals of the Growth Lab, so I feel at home. Even though I must say that most countries are unable to grow, whether the right kind or the wrong kind, whether shared or unshared. So let's not put too many adjectives because it's hard enough just to get some dynamism going. But anyway, what I'm going to talk about is what I have learned about growth and the reasons why growth is difficult or how to accelerate it, why it's hard for growth to be shared. I will touch on some issues that I read in the brochures of the Bennett School. They say that they care a lot about place-based focus and they care about regional inequality. So I'm going to stretch a little bit the theory I'm going to present so to make sense of these things. I'm going to speak very, very briefly on policy at the end because I will run out of time. But we have plenty of time, half an hour or 45 minutes for a discussion afterwards, so we will have plenty of time to discuss many things that are planned or unplanned. Let me start by saying that prosperity is a concept that got started in Scotland, right? So economics started asking the question, why are some countries rich and other countries poor? What's the secret of the wealth of nations? When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, the richest country in the world was the Netherlands. And it was about 4 times richer than the poorest country in the world. And we know that, that's at Madison, Angus Madison did all this. So more or less, by that time, the richest country in the world was 4 times richer than the poorest country in the world. If you take the World Development Indicators, the poorest country in the world is Burundi. So if you multiply by 4 the income per capita of Burundi, you get to Mali, We are still in Africa. We multiply by 4 the income per capita of Mali, you get to Bolivia, the poorest country in South America, even though it might get displaced by Venezuela if things go the way they are. If you multiply by 4 the income per capita of Bolivia, you go to Romania. You multiply by 4 the income per capita of Romania, you go to Australia. So a problem that was a problem of 4 to 1 has become a problem of 256 to 1, which is scientific proof that the problem does not go away by just reading Adam Smith. And the reason why it hasn't gone away is because the world changed dramatically since Adam Smith. This is sort of like a graph of GDP per capita for the world since the year 0. And it kind of looks like a hockey stick. But if we zoom into the last 200 years, it shows that something happened in parts of the world that didn't happen in other parts of the world. So if you measure the differences in countries here, they were very small, and now they're huge, right? So don't blame Adam Smith. So what is behind these income differentials? Well, you know, a couple of years ago, we gave a Nobel Prize to this book saying, you know, it's institutions. You know, some countries have good institutions, other countries have bad institutions. And the book starts, the chapter 1 of that book is the story of the 2 Nogales. Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Sonora. And it says, well, you know, what could possibly be the difference? They're on both sides of the same river. One is rich, one is poor. Has to be institutions. But what the book didn't say is that if you go a little bit to south of Mexico, you get to the state of Guerrero. Has a GDP per capita like that of Honduras. If you multiply by 2 the GDP per capita of the state of Guerrero, you go to the state of Sinaloa, which has a GDP per capita, I say, like that of Jamaica before this horrible hurricane. Maybe. If you multiply by 2 Sinaloa, you get to Guanajuato. And if you multiply by 2 Guanajuato, you get to the state of Nuevo León, where the city of Monterrey is. And that has a GDP per capita similar to that of Korea. So with the same legal framework, the same federal judicial system, the same political representation system, the same exchange rate, the same interest rate, the same macroeconomic setup, the same financial architecture, you get a Honduras and get a Korea. So I don't know what we want to call institutions, but there's a lot of variance to be explained beyond national level institutions, okay? So this means that in the world today, it's possible to take this picture and, you know, the 2 pictures. It's interesting because if I ask you to take a picture of a typewriter, what would you do? Where would you find a typewriter to take a picture from? Right? So typically we think that, you know, good technology displaces bad technology or something. But in the world, we can take these pictures. Now, if you are a trained economist, they'll tell you, you know, models are ways of telling stories, and stories have characters. And so the standard story to describe this is this one, okay? Where here what you have is output, GDP, something like that. Here there's a black box. And inside the black box, we're going to put something we're going to call technology. We don't really know what it is. We think it's some residual thing. The others are capital, labor, and human capital. And these are going to be the characters. If you go back to the picture, you would say, for example, the guy on the right has more land than the other guy. He has more capital than the other guy, has more human capital than the other guy, so you would account for these differences using these characters. It's a very neoclassical frame of mind. I'm going to say it's not just neoclassical, it's really classical. It's really Greek. Because the Greeks believed that the world was made out of some fundamental substances, which were earth, water, air, and fire. And so we're trying to tell the story of what's the problem with the world using these characters. Okay? Now, maybe the world is not made out of these characters, but it's made out of these characters. Now you might say, what's the difference? It's only characters. Well, the fundamental difference is that with the periodic table, there are some rules of how these things combine. And when you combine these characters, you get molecules. And when you put more of these things together, you get macromolecules. And when you put many macromolecules together, you get things like these cells, right? And when you put many of these cells together, you get cute things like this rabbit, right? And when you put many of these animals together, you get kind of like social animals. And when you put many of these social animals together, we get this, right? So the idea is that combining the underlying elements creates things that have properties that the underlying thing doesn't have. Okay? So there are some emergent properties that comes from combination. And I'm going to argue that this is an important way to understand the economy, because I'm going to argue that fundamentally, if you want to use economic language, you'd say that the secret of growth is technology, and that's kind of not controversial anymore, that we just gave a Nobel Prize on that idea. Now, the problem is, what do we want to define as technology? I would say technology is knowledge, productive knowledge, knowledge on how to do things in the world. Because unfortunately, this is a false picture, right? There is no such thing as hamburger trees. If you want a hamburger, you cannot extract it from nature. You have to transform nature, right? You can read a cookbook, and it says, you need meat, you need cheese, you need tomato, you need a bun, right? And it tells you how to cook it in the cookbook, etc. The cookbook is not going to tell you how to make the bun, how to make the meat, how to domesticate animals or cows, or how to make cheese. It doesn't say any of that. It assumes that you can get access to those things. But essentially, if you want to make a hamburger, you have to change the world. And to change the world, you have to know how to change the world. And the knowledge on how to change the world from where it is to the way we want it to be, say like a hamburger, is the productive knowledge. It's technology. Now, in this example, you see immediately that this knowledge is going to take kind of like three forms. The bun, the tomato, the cheese that you use to make the hamburger, the cookbook doesn't say how to make it. It presumes that you're going to get access to it, right? That means that it must be in some other cookbook or in some, but as far as you're concerned, that knowledge is embodied in the things. Okay, so we call that embodied knowledge. So part of the technology takes the form of embodied knowledge. Part of technology takes the form of codified knowledge. In this case, the cookbook. Okay? In this case, it's ink over paper, but you see it's not even the ink or it's not the paper, it's some symbolic thing because they took a picture. This is a digital picture of ink over paper, and it doesn't change the meaning. Sort of like the meaning is in some other space. Huh? But if this is all that technology was, we could put the tools on a container and ship them maybe to Burundi. And if the market won't do it, we'll create an NGO to do it. And we can take all these codes and put them online. Then everybody has access to it. And then as a consequence, the world will be technologically flat. But that's not the end of the story, because you can see what's missing by asking yourself the question, what do you do when your tooth hurts? I wouldn't advise that you download an article from the web and follow the instructions, right? No, you actually go to a dentist, and the dentist uses tools The dentist follows protocols, codes, but the dentist mixes the tools and the protocols with something you and I may not have, which is the ability to look into the mouth and see things we wouldn't see, and the ability to use the tools and way we would not know how. And that third thing is something you might want to call know-how. Call it tacit knowledge. It's something that is in brains and only in brains. It doesn't take any other instantiation. Now, know-how is not information. And to show you that, let me just show you a picture of Rafa Nadal to just make the point that if Rafa Nadal was giving this lecture, your tennis game will not improve. Okay? It's not information. And the interesting thing is that it's not only know-how of an individual, it's team know-how. And to make that point, I want to show you this picture, and you might say, this lady knows how to implement that technology. But the truth is that to implement that technology, you need all these other people. Because to make the airplane fly, it's a team sport. Now, what makes things in the world is not individual know-how, but collective know-how, okay? Now, I'm going to argue that know-how is the fundamental substance we need to measure. And just to tell you the complexities of measuring, I'm going to compare two fictitious people, okay? One is an Inuit from northern Canada, and here's the Inuit engaged in food production. Here's the Inuit engaged in housing construction. And here's the Inuit engaged in the transportation industry. And I'm going to compare him to modern man to ask the question, who has more know-how? Hard to answer, right? Because this guy uses glasses, uses headphones, shirts, watches, computers, screens. He doesn't know how to make any of that. You put this guy here, we know he will not survive. We don't know if he will freeze to death or if he will starve to death, but he won't make it, right? So there's no practical way in which you can say that this guy has more know-how than these guys. But what is possible to say is that the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make more things than the society to which these guys belong. Because the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make glasses, headphones, shirts, watches, computers, screens, and so on. He doesn't, right? Now, the society to which these guys belong, everybody knows how to make an igloo, everybody knows how to hunt, everybody knows how to fish, everybody knows how to run a dog sled. So everybody has a very significant chunk of the technology of their society in their heads. In this society, this guy has an infinitesimal knowledge of what is known in society. And the punchline of the story is to say that societies know more, not because individuals know more, but because individuals know different. The whole knows more when individuals know different. Okay? So, to illustrate that point, I'm going to show you a picture of the competition. Okay? Harvard is a recent university, only 1636. You know? So I know that Cambridge was 500 years old or something by then. But so we're a newcomer. And Harvard in 1636 was founded in this building. Now 1636 is before Hobbes, before Locke, before Newton, before Lavoisier in chemistry, before Linnaeus and biology, before, I can go on, Pasteur, I'm showing off, right? So, because there's so much knowledge that has been accumulated since 1636, we needed to put it in more buildings, right? And we needed more buildings, and we needed more buildings. Now, in 1636, a bachelor's degree lasted 4 years. Now that we have so much more to teach, it still lasts 4 years. So how did we adjust to the fact that there's so much more to teach and no more time to teach it in? Well, we created a bunch of specializations. We put different bits of knowledge in different heads. So Adam Smith talked about the division of labor. I think what he really had in mind was this division of knowledge, the division of know-how. Okay? So I don't know how much knowledge fits in a head, but we have these constants, you know. On MPhil here is essentially 10 courses of 16 hours, so it's 160 hours plus the third term. So, you know, there's so much time you have to teach an MPhil. There's a lot to teach. You have to choose what you're going to put in a head and what can be put in different heads and coordinate it. So part of the coming up with a curriculum is to decide what ideas are better placed in a single head and what ideas can be put in different heads so that your dentist is not your lawyer, right? So, how much knowledge fits in a head? I don't know if it's a kilobyte, a terabyte, a gigabyte, so I'm going to call it a person byte, okay? It's whatever. Now, to use knowledge, so you put, you know, different bits of knowledge in different heads. If you want to use knowledge, you may have to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? Now, how much knowledge, how many people you need to bring back together depends on how many person bytes a product requires. So, if a product requires more than one person byte, you need more than one person. Where do you bring people together? You bring people in firms. And because that's not enough, we need to string these firms in value chains. So you can have, you know, a hamburger shop, and then, but the hamburger shop is going to buy the meat, is going to buy the bun, is going to buy the cheese, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay. Now you can ask yourself the question, how many person bytes does a product require? For example, these you could say, these could be family businesses run by the family. Okay, so one family byte. You realize that there is no family that can make these products. And you might say that there is no country that can make this product. This product is made across all of those geographies and all those companies because the knowledge necessary to make the landing gear is so different from the knowledge necessary to make the turbines or the avionics or the carpets or the seats or the toilets, you know. So you need to bring all of that together, not because you're going to make many airplanes, but just to make one airplane, right? So it's not economies of scale. This is a big firm. You can ask yourself the question, how many person bytes does this firm employ? One way to answer that question is to take this person, put them over there, take this person, put them here, and bring this person over here, and you ask yourself, would you notice? Well, let me say that if you did this experiment in this group, you'll hear the difference, right? This is a good picture of modern technology, is the fact that you bring many different skills together to make something, okay? Now, in order to make this easy to think, I confess that I can only think in metaphors. I'm going to, instead of using the metaphor of atoms and molecules, I'm going to use the metaphor of letters and words. You know, you have this emergence that the meaning of a letter is completely different from the meaning of a word, right? A C is completely different from a cat, right? So there's some emergence properties of mixing the letters, right? But these are the characteristics of, so I'm going to say these atoms of knowledge, I'm going to call the letters, and products, you have to string them together, the way we put that orchestra together, okay? So if you only have one letter, there aren't too many words you can put together. If I give you these 3 letters, now you can make 4 words, and you can make 3-letter words. If I just give you 1 extra letter, now you can make 9 words, and you can make 4-letter words. If you put these 10 letters together, I didn't count it, but the Scrabble website says that you can make 595 words. And if I give you all 26 letters, you can make the whole dictionary. So these things, as you have more of these letters, you can make more words, and you can make longer words. Okay? So if we go back to this picture, and we want to say, what do you see now? I'm going to ask the question, who has more know-how? And this looks like the same question I asked before, because this guy, he knows how to take care of his own bulls. He knows how to maybe make his own tools. He makes his own fertilizer with dung. He uses last year's crop as seed, right? He's pretty self-sufficient. This guy drives this harvester. He doesn't have a clue how to make the harvester. The harvester is like an airplane, right? He uses gasoline. No clue how to make gasoline. He uses genetically modified seeds. He doesn't know what the word means. If the machine breaks down, he knows the phone number of whom to call, right? So there is no sense in which you can say that this guy has more know-how than that guy. But it is possible to say that this guy is 1 letter in a very long word. And this guy is making a very short word. Obviously, this guy is going to appear to be more productive, but that productivity is coming from the mobilization of all that knowledge that he doesn't have. Okay? So that's, if you want, the secret of growth as this emergent phenomenon of the accumulation of knowledge. Okay? So in this, if you want to understand the theory of economic complexity, we're going to have 3 characters. The first character is we're going to have letters. These are productive capabilities, okay? We're going to have places. And places have a subset of these letters. And then we're going to have products. And products are also combinations of these letters. So we're going to think that places have an endowment of letters, products have a requirement of letters, and out of this we're going to get who is able to do what. That is, which places are able to make which products, okay? Now, we're going to derive a certain set of observations from this simple description of the world. The place at the top has a lot of letters. The place at the bottom has few letters. Well, it just so happens that because the place at the top has a lot of letters, it can make all 5 products. It has what it takes to make all 5 products. This place that has very few letters can only make 1 product. So one thing that is associated with how many letters you have is how many products you can make. Okay? That's something we can observe, even if we don't observe the letters. We can observe how many products you make. Now this is a pretty long word. So long that we cheated, right? Right? In how many countries, how many places make this product? In this case, only 1, right? This is a very short word. How many places make this product? All 3. So we call the number of places that make a product, we call that the ubiquity of the product. Okay? Product that is made everywhere must be easy to make. A product that is made in few places must be hard to make. So from here, I'm going to derive the following proposition, that if this theory of the world is correct, I'm going to observe that the places that have many letters will have simultaneously be very diversified, making many things, and they're going to be making things that are made in fewer places. And the places that have very few letters are going to make few things and things that are made everywhere, like hat. Okay? So when we go to see the data for the world, that's exactly what we find. That the rich countries are all here. They make many things and things that are done in few other places. And the poor countries are all here. They make few things and things that are done everywhere. And what is true at the level of countries is true at the level of municipalities. These are municipalities in Chile. Here's municipalities around Santiago. And up there is where the penguins live. And these are states in Mexico. These are cities in Turkey. These are states in Colombia. So the world, wherever you look, you're going to find these patterns. And these patterns are what you would have expected if the world is made out of letters or atoms, however you want to describe. Now, we can use, and I won't go into how, these data to infer essentially how many letters does a product require and how many letters does a place have. And we call how many letters does a product require, the metric of that, we call it the product complexity index. And so this, just whom does what, it has no information about price or anything. It says that these are long words and these are short words. And it's going to say that these are, this is the index of economic complexity of, which countries have more letters, which countries have fewer letters. Okay? You can see, well, Britain has quite a few, more or less like France, more than Spain. In North Africa, Tunisia seems to have more letters than the others. Israel has a lot. South Africa has a lot relative to sub-Saharan Africa. Mexico has more than South America, and so on. Okay? Now, interesting, you might say, does this have anything to do with prosperity? Well, this is the index of economic complexity, and this is GDP per capita, once you've partialed out natural resource wealth. So you might say, gee, not bad, not bad. We are able to explain how rich our places, not by knowing what their GDP is, but just by knowing what is it that they do and who else does what they do and so on. So you can extract it from what you do, because what you do tells you something about what you know how to do. Okay? Now, you might say, well, Professor Hausmann, this is a pretty good first step, but your theory makes errors because all countries don't align on your line, right? For example, India here, you would say India is too poor for all the letters that it has. And you would say, Greece, how did you get to be so rich given how little you know, right? Well, guess what? This was done with 2008 data. Since then, Greece got into a hell of a lot of trouble, and India has been doing quite well, which suggests that in some sense, the letters that you have is more informative to where you're going than your current income. In some sense, it reminds me of Pindar, this pre-Socratic philosopher that Nietzsche was a big fan of. He said, the big maxim of Pindar was, become who you are. Ponder it. So you already are, you're an acorn, you're going to become a tree, right? So you have it in you to be, right? So in some sense, this is a more fundamental determinant. And this just shows that these errors, these supposed error terms, contain information about where you're going, about the future. But we can also do this at the city level, and these are metropolitan statistical areas in the US. This is the economic complexity index calculated at the metropolitan area. This is total employment, and this is average wages. And if you have I'll go on to why this is so interesting, and we're now doing a report on how cities grow and how to diagnose cities' growth, and I'm going to, but this comes out of that work. So just to say that looking at these letters is important. Okay? Now, the next thing is we're going to say, well, okay, let me redefine growth and development. It's just acquiring more letters and expressing it in more words and in longer words. That's the redescription of the growth process. Okay? Now, the only problem is that to accumulate more letters, you're going to face this well-known problem. Thank God you guys are pretty urban people. Otherwise, you would have complained that this is a rooster, not a chicken. But the problem of this chicken and egg problem is that to do something, you have to know how to do it. But you typically don't know how to do the things you don't do. So how do you start doing the things you are not doing? If to do them, you have to know how to do them, but you don't know how to do the things you don't do. Right? You need watchmakers to make watches. But how do you become a watchmaker in a country that doesn't make watches? Right? But without the watchmaker, how do you make the watches? Right? So that chicken and egg problem is going to slow the process of acquiring letters. But this process of acquiring letters is going to be related to this other classification problem. And this classification problem asks the question, which two animals are highly related to each other, and which animal is out of the group? So people typically say, well, the zebra and the lion are from Africa, so maybe related. Or they say that the zebra eats grass, and these other two animals don't eat grass, so they live at different trophic levels. And those theories are fine, but not in this context, because in this context, the true theory of the world is the Scrabble theory. And in Scrabble, a zebra is just a bear with an extra Z. So if you want to go from bear to zebra, you just need to solve one chicken and egg problem. But if you want to go from bear to lion, you start with 4 letters you don't need, and you need 4 letters you don't have. So moving in this space is going to be affected by these cognitive distances. So we needed to develop a metaphor on what do these cognitive distances mean. So the metaphor now is that a product is not a word, a product is a tree in a forest. And the space of technology is this forest of products. Every product is a tree, okay? And so we had to map out the map of technology, if you want. And this is what came out, okay? Here, every circle is a product. The size of the circle is proportional to world trade in that good. This is apparel. This is textiles and home goods. This is electronics. This is machinery. These are chemicals. These are minerals. These are agricultural products. Some parts of this forest are very dense. So there's many bear to zebra connections. For example, if you know how to make one kind of apparel, it's kind of like easy to figure out how to make another kind of apparel. You need to cut and sew, right? If you know how to make one kind of electronic, it's typically easy to make another kind of electronic. This space is very heterogeneous. It's not one tree every 5 meters. Now, once you have the technology, it's possible to represent a country. How would you represent a country? Well, a country is a collection of teams that make products, a collection of firms that make products. So in this metaphor, what's a firm? A firm is a monkey. Okay, a monkey that lives on the tree lives off the tree. So a country is going to be a collection of firms, so it's a collection of monkeys, and the question is, country is going to be characterized by where it has its monkeys. Okay, so I showed you the forest. I'm going to illustrate this is Venezuela in the space. Okay, in gray it means we don't have monkeys there. It's pretty barren. We have oil and stop counting. So I'm going to compare Venezuela to Mexico. Okay? And this is Mexico. You say, oh, Mexico is much more colorful than Venezuela. Okay? But you might say, well, but Mexico has 130 million people. Venezuela probably now doesn't have 30 million people. Everybody's left. So maybe we should compare it to a smaller country, say like Austria. So if this is Mexico, this is Austria. So even though Austria is a country of 9 million people, not 130 million people, it has more monkeys than Mexico, okay? So this, for example, is Poland. It has fewer monkeys than Austria, but anyway. So the next question is, do these monkeys move? So do they move? So I'm going to tell the story of two countries. One is Ghana and one is Thailand. They both started with relatively similar GDP per capita back in 1962. Now, Ghana is a country that invested more rapidly in education than Thailand. So these are years of schooling. Ghana beats Thailand in this period. And education in Ghana is in English. You know, they say Thai is a beautiful language, but there are more people in the world that speak English than people that speak Thai, so this should give an extra advantage to Ghana. Now, this is what Ghana was good at in 1962. Okay, cocoa, wood, more wood, manganese, bauxite. And this is what Thailand was good at. By the way, the colors mean, this color means you can eat it, this color means you can't eat it, but it's natural, right? So definitely there were more monkeys in Thailand than in Ghana, but the colors are very similar, okay? This is how it looks in the product space, okay? When you see these things that are densely colored, it means that there's a monkey there. So now I'm going to show you a movie, but you have to pay a lot of attention because, okay, so this is 1965, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010. Okay, I don't know what you saw, but maybe I can go back again and it's more slowly maybe. Okay, so 65, 70, they get these monkeys here near this. This is the garment cluster. 75, boom, they get more monkeys here in the garments cluster. 80, woo, they take a lot of things in the garment cluster. This is the processed food cluster. Right? And now suddenly they got these two monkeys in the electronics cluster. That's 1980, 85, 90, they've taken over the whole electronics cluster. And they start moving to this one is the machinery cluster, and they get more monkeys here in the machinery cluster. Now this machinery cluster is so profitable that they start abandoning the garments cluster. Okay? So what you see is a lot of movement in terms of what it is that you know how to do. Okay? So this was Ghana in 1962, and this is Ghana in 2010. So you see 62, 2010, you know? There's change. Now you have more boxes. That means more monkeys. But the colors are pretty much the same. You know, they went from cocoa beans to cocoa beans, cocoa paste, cocoa butter, cocoa powder, no? So this is exports per capita in constant dollars. See, there's no trend. If anything, they went from $200 per capita to $150 per capita. This was Thailand in 1962, and this is Thailand now. Right? These colors, these two colors here, are still there. But now there's all this other stuff that wasn't there before. Okay? And these are exports per capita. And they started at 50 million and they ended up at 2,500. So they started in a very similar point, Ghana with more education, but GDP per capita got stuck in Ghana, and now Thailand is 7 times richer than Ghana. Okay, so this is just to say that the process of growth is this process of acquiring capabilities, expressing them in more products and in more complex products, more products that are more difficult to make. We can look at what new monkeys appeared in every country in this period of time. For example, this is China's market share in the world. You see they got into garments, later they got into electronics, later they got into machinery. This is Thailand, they got into garments, later into electronics, then into machinery. In Tunisia, they got into garments and very little into electronics. In Sri Lanka, they got into garments, kicked around in garments. The process never continued. Okay, so this process of transformation can get stuck in the process. So we use this to figure out what do countries have in their adjacent possible, which transitions are from bear to lion, and which transitions are from bear to zebra. So what's easier to do? To try to think of strategies to parsimoniously accumulate knowledge, express it in slightly more complex goods, and help countries figure out a way forward. Let me talk now a little bit about a different part of our research when we go to cities. And, the world really lives in cities, I don't know if you've emphasized this, but most places in the world are uninhabited, right? So humans live in very few places. It's interesting if you see Egypt, you can see the Nile, no? Humans live in very few places. And in the places where they live, they try to, live one on top of the other. And it's not just here, it's here, or it's even here in Boston, right? So you have to ask yourself the question, why the hell? They're so big planet, why do you have to be one on top of the other, right? Why do we subject ourselves to this pain? And the answer is this. Now, let me explain this graph because it's actually very simple but very beautiful. This graph answers the question, what is the relationship between how many letters you have and what percentage of, say, the alphabet you have and what percentage of the dictionary you can write? Okay? You might say, well, I don't know, before with 1 you did 1, with 2, remember when we started. But let me say, we don't know what is the grammar of this language of which we have a metaphor. But suppose that all words are 1 letter long. So if all words are 1 letter long, then you'll have a very linear relationship between how much of the alphabet you have and how much of the dictionary you can write. With 1 letter you make 1, with 3 letters you make 3, with 10 letters you make 10, no? So it's very linear. Now suppose that all words are 10 letters long. You have 5 letters. How much do you make? 0. You have 9 letters. How much do you make? Still 0. You have 10 letters. How much you can make? Well, maybe you can make 1. I give you 11 letters. Well, now that's 11, choose 10, that's 11. I give you 12 letters, that's 12, choose 10, that's 66. So suddenly you get to a point when you have enough letters, now the number of combinations start growing exponentially. So in this paper, we asked ourselves the question, is the world that we live in more or less linear, or the world that we live in is more convex? And the estimation with different data sets showed that all our estimations that the world is pretty convex. That is, unless you have many, many letters, you make very few things. Like, say, with 80% of the letters, you make less than 20% of the words. That's going to create, I don't like this feature of the world, okay? But this is going to create an important pressure, because if you're here, getting an extra letter doesn't pay much. If you're here, when you have many letters, I give you an extra letter. That extra letter can now combine with many of your other letters. So it gives you a much bigger bang. So this is going to be a source of inequality, regional inequality. This is going to be a source of headache, okay? Because you're going to, if you're in a world where you cannot put all letters everywhere, and you have to choose between putting some letters everywhere or all letters somewhere, this is going to say, no, it's better to put, you see, some letters everywhere, you're here. All letters somewhere, there will be one place that has everything, say, call it London, right? And then everywhere else, there's very few things are feasible, because you need to be able to make, to bring together all the letters that the production requires. So this is going to be a mechanism for divergence, okay? This is going to be a headwind in the Bennett School's aspiration of growth, shared growth. So, and it has to do with the fact that, you know, if you have a place that has a lot of diversity of letters, a lot is going to be possible vis-a-vis a place that has very similar letters. And that's, in some sense, you know, what gets captured in this picture that I had shown before. Now, when we think of countries, we tend to think of countries as, we call them technically in economics, small open economies. That is, they're small in the sense that what happens in the country is not going to change the global economy, and they're open because they interact with the rest of the world. If a country is a small open economy, a city is an even smaller and even more open economy. In the sense that a city can trade with outside of the city, right? Goods. People can move in and out of the city more easily than they can move in and out of the country, right? Capital can move very easily because the banks are the same inside the city and elsewhere. The currency is the same, they have a fixed exchange rate, right? So a city is, they don't have trade barriers. So a city is going to be a very open economy. And a city likes to consume things that it doesn't know how to make. For example, I'm going to guess that the city of Cambridge doesn't know how to make cars. I'm going to assume that it doesn't make X-ray machines. I'm going to assume that it makes very few movies. But people in Cambridge want to consume cars, X-ray, right? So how do you get them? You have to import them from outside the city. How are you going to pay for that? Well, you have to trade for it. And to trade for it means that you're going to do something in the city that you're going to export. So the size of a city is going to be directly related to the size of its exports. Exports meaning things that you do in the city and sell outside of the city, not outside of the country. Those are the activities that bring money into a city. Because there are many activities like the grocery shop that are going to take money out of a city, because all the stuff that is sold in grocery shops were not made in Cambridge. So how is Cambridge paying for all of these things? Well, I'm going to guess one of the major export industry of Cambridge, right? I guess it's university education, no? So that's right. So the export industry determines kind of like the character, the dynamism of a place, okay? And when the export industry gets in trouble, say if you have a mining town and the mine closes, when the mine closes, you get a ghost town, right? Because it's not only that the miners lost their jobs, it's the grocer, the dentist, everybody leaves because there's no money coming into town anymore, right? And so this is a picture of a ghost town. This is another picture of a ghost town. That's what happens when a mine closes. But sometimes you have a mine. Because you have a mine, people go to live, miners go, but dentists and grocers and other people go. Everyone is a letter, right? But sometimes you get enough letters so that when the mine closes, you get this. And this is the city of Denver. It had a mine for 20 years, a gold mine. It closed in 1890, but the city didn't die, right? But without the mine, the city would not have existed. But the mine disappeared, and the city's still there, okay? So sometimes you need something to create the industry, but if that industry dies, sometimes the city dies, sometimes the city survives. This is a picture of the things that are tradable at the city level, okay? These are the things that cities have that they live off of. This is calculated for the US. And these are the things that typically are for local consumption inside the city, okay? So these activities are going to depend on how much money there is in the city. But how much money there is in the city is going to be determined by these activities that bring money into the city, okay? When a city gets into trouble, it's typically because its export sector gets into trouble, okay? So the way cities typically grow is that because they have some letters, they're able to export something. Because they're able to export, their increased capacity to import, there's more money in town, that brings in more population. More population means more letters, and with more letters, you can have more complexity and more exports. But it can go the other way, right? That if the export sector gets into trouble, then you cannot import as much, you cannot have as much population, people start leaving, and then you get less complexity and the city implodes. And this is what has happened super dramatically in places like the Rust Belt in the US, where Detroit got into trouble because the car industry got into trouble, or Gary, Indiana, or Pittsburgh got into trouble because the steel industry got into trouble. Sheffield, I guess it's the same story. So it's the export sector gets into trouble. The whole city gets into trouble, and part of a strategy has to be to ask yourself the question, okay, this industry got into trouble, what else can we do here that we can export? Because if you just invest in the park being nicer and school quality or whatever, if it doesn't translate into an export industry, the city is not going to work. So this is going to generate a lot of a very different way to think about many areas of policy, okay? Coordination failures are rife because of chicken and egg problem. Coordination failures is chicken and egg is so much more colorful, isn't it? And so there's going to be a role for that, especially in public goods. Public goods are the things that the market doesn't produce. You can buy a car in the market, but you cannot buy the road. You cannot buy the traffic lights, the traffic signs, the traffic rules, the traffic cops. Every technology is going to live in a space of public goods. And countries are typically very lousy at providing the public goods that are needed by the industries that exist. They're often hopeless in providing the public goods of the industries that don't yet exist and will not exist because you didn't provide the public good. That's another chicken and egg problem. So that's why letting the market determine is not going to be efficient, because things need public goods, and public goods by definition the market is not going to provide. So we need tools to figure out how to move in this space, and the Growth Lab has been busy at creating these tools. We have this Atlas of Economic Complexity that I invite you to check out. We have an Atlas of City that's called Metroverse. We have an Atlas on how to play move your monkeys, conscious of the fact that there's this energy transition happening that's going to change the shape of some markets. And so we have a way for countries to figure out the role that they can play there. We need tools to diagnose growth problems. and we need to move from diagnostics to therapeutics and implementation in more effective ways, and that's why I think public policy is such an important area of research. I'd like to say that there's no such thing as best practice. Best practice is a dangerous term because in the world, there's no such thing as perfect suits. There are only perfectly tailored suits. Every body is different, every context is different, and a lot of what a public policy expert needs to have is the ability to tailor, to understand context and to design for context and to create processes that can do that. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
So, as you start thinking about your questions, and I'm going to open the floor in a second, and there is not a lot of time, and I want to leave it mostly to you to ask whatever is on your mind. I'm going to ask only one thing, which is, in your theory of growth, and you sort of ended on this note, you were stressing one word, which is exports, a lot. And a book came out a few weeks ago, which is called The London Consensus. It was published at the London School of Economics. And everybody who is somebody in the economics profession is in there and wrote a chapter. And your chapter is called, I think, Export-Led Growth. So you seem to be a guy that loves exports. And we seem to be entering into a world where there are a lot of guys that do not like exports very much. And so the question is, if exports are the secret to growth, and globalization is sort of on a slowdown trend, is development on a slowdown trend as well? Or are there words of optimism that you share with policymakers in developing countries on this point?
So let me explain. I really like imports. I love wine, and Venezuela doesn't make wine. I love, so I love imports, but the only way you can get imports is if you trade for them. So many countries, and especially developing countries, are constrained by their lack of generation of foreign exchange. And you realize that because we have this thing we call the purchasing power parity adjustment, right? The PPP adjustment. And that says that poor countries are cheap. That a dollar buys more in the developing world than it does in the rich world. And the reason why that happens is because for poor countries, generating a dollar is so expensive that you can buy half the country for $1. Okay? So that's a reflection of the fact that poor countries are poor because they have low productivity, but that low productivity is particularly bad in exportables. So it's a symptom that the problem is in exportables. And that's going to make development all that more difficult. So, because then if dollars are super expensive and you buy your machines, you buy your technology from abroad, you even hire McKinsey. Well, if your PPP adjustment factor is a factor of 3, it means that everything from abroad is more expensive, so technology is more expensive. So that I don't like exports per se, but all the indications are that countries are bumping against that constraint as an important constraint. Now, you raise a very important question. In this world in which the rules of trade have been completely subverted in an inconceivable way, I'm not a very religious person, but sometimes I pray to the American Supreme Court because what Trump has done with trading rules is completely unconstitutional. The US has written trade agreements left and right. These trade agreements have I don't know, chapter 34, which is called Dispute Resolution Mechanism. And no one has been reading. I mean, this has been put aside. The idea is we have weaponized trade policy. So in that world, I don't know. I don't know how we need to rethink strategies. When I'm optimistic, I say that the U.S. is 13% of global imports. So there's 87% of the world left. The US is 50% of world capital markets, 25% of world GDP, and only 13% of world imports. So one of the things that we've been studying at the Growth Lab is, protectionism is bad for your own country. You put protection is bad for your own exports, because now your exporters have to buy inputs at a higher price than the world price, and that hurts your exporters. So what we're trying to identify is which are the American exporters that are going to be hurt because of American protectionism, to try to get into those lines of business, right? And even attracting American companies that are going to say, yeah, I want to locate in the US to sell in the US, but I don't want to locate in the US to sell abroad because these tariffs are making me uncompetitive. So my attitude is always to look for opportunity. And so we'll have to think about opportunities. But yes, we have to rethink the world order. But maybe, one of these days, the Supreme Court is going to say that all of these tariffs that Trump has imposed are illegal because it has to be an act of Congress. Can't be that all these countries signed free trade agreements with the US, they had to get it through their Senate, and now through presidential decree they disappear. So, we're living in this period of extreme trade uncertainty.
How are we doing on questions? Are there a few?
Yeah, quite a few.
We have some mics. I'll go to Hugo here.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much. This was very exciting. I'd like to go back to the Scrabble metaphor. I'm a notorious bad speller and a sore loser, but I do understand that Scrabble has different points per letter. A K owes you many more points in the French Scrabble than an A. So to use that metaphor, you do have to pick your fighters and pick your letters. And I think you alluded in something like this with the Thailand case, where you explained that, manufacturing yields so much more revenue and so much more profitable that Thailand has, unconsciously or consciously, decided to move towards this industry, to build around this set of letters. How do you pick those fighters? How do you prioritize the letters you want to get in your set?
Well, we have some, first of all, there is no market for these letters, so it's a little bit more complicated. You have to, typically, if you're the government, you don't know how to make anything, right? So you are in the business of encouraging investment, attracting investment. So we like to work a lot with investment promotion agencies. We create tools for them to try to figure out, we develop metrics of what we call feasibility, so which things are sort of like in your adjacent possible, and attractiveness or strategic value. So if you were to go to that tree, are your monkeys now closer to other trees that they can continue jumping? So we have different ways of estimating feasibility and attractiveness. And we train investment promotion agencies to either market the country or to go directly to companies to make the business case of why they should be in your country. And then you want to anticipate the company is going to come and say, yeah, but I need X, Y, and Z, and I'm not sure that I'm going to, in your country, be able to find those letters that I need to put the word together. And so you need a pretty responsive government that realizes which things are just not feasible, which things are sort of there, but you have to get a little bit of your act together. Every place is super different because the potential agents of change are different. One agent of change is foreign direct investment, okay? But another agent of change can be a well-run state-owned enterprise. We're now working with OCP in Morocco, and they're quite an impressive company. They have a big balance sheet, they have resources, they have capabilities, and they're thinking very strategically of what to do next. Another way you can do things is the opposite of FDI. FDI is, you put some lipstick on and you see if somebody comes, right? And actually, many of these organizations, they think that they're attracting dollars. And they're thinking in dollars. We think in knowledge, right? Not in dollars, in knowledge, right? That's what you're after. So if what you're after is the knowledge for middle-income countries, or say like Turkey, maybe the way to do it is you don't wait for them to come, you acquire them. And so, for example, everybody knows Godiva chocolates. That's a Turkish company now. Grundig Electronics, that's a Turkish company now. So when Google didn't know how to make video streaming, they bought YouTube. So that's another avenue. We find that migration is a very important avenue of diversification. Diasporas are very important because the diaspora kind of like knows two worlds and can arbitrage these knowledge gaps. The diaspora has experience. I mean, if you have a diaspora and they went to Switzerland, they became watchmakers. So now you have a watchmaker in your network. So all of these are avenues for you can nudge conglomerates. That was the Korean way to do it, to say, you're a big company, you have financial capital, you have managerial capital, you have reputational capital. I need you to diversify, and they nudge them in they move them to shipbuilding, to chemicals, to electronics, to semiconductors, and whatever you want to say about this not being kosher, Korea is an incredible success story. So that's why I say that there's no perfect suit. There's only perfectly tailored suits. But you needed to have the chai balls to play ball.
I'd like to go back to your chart where you said it shows where your place on the chart shows where you're going. And I truly did not understand that because it didn't sort of seem to me to be a way to sort of say this country's monkeys are getting old and aged and not doing as well. It seemed like, because you look at like Japan and some of the other countries that have fallen from where they are, how does that chart say predict where they're going?
So I showed several charts, I think more, but one of them I showed India and Greece.
Right, I'm looking at that.
Yeah, and India and Greece. So the question is, are you richer or poorer than I expected you to be? And so India was much poorer than I expected India to be, and Greece was much richer than I expected Greece to be. And what this example shows is that you tend to go to where I thought you were going to be. So if I made a mistake in thinking that, gee, why are you so poor given how you know, in the future you'll get richer. If I go and say, gee, you surprised me, how are you so rich given how little you know, you'll have trouble growing in the future. So that error, that whether you're above or below that line, we have shown that it is predictive of future growth. The other thing that's highly predictive of future growth is where are you in the forest? Are you in the forest in a place that has many diversification opportunities nearby? So many bear to zebra possibilities? Or are you in a part of a forest where there's nothing interesting nearby? And that's also a very predictive of future growth. And it's also predictive of, where you are in the product space predicts what kind of diversification you're going to have. So predicting is not that hot, but I think it's indicative that we're capturing something about the mechanism that we can use for strategy.
You go on this side, over there. Oh, wait, one question on this side. We do one-on-one, one each.
Can we take 2 questions?
Oh, we can take 2 questions as well, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. So when talking about how countries grow, I think it's easy to assume not like a linear trajectory, but always like a country growing. But then when a country is more, like when an economy is more diversified, it's like at a relatively good state, and then it suffers a catastrophe or a war, or it gets with its infrastructure destroyed, its assets destroyed, like its population gone, you can think today, Ukraine or Venezuela, of course. In a country like that, how do you then, or what can, in another state, a government go back and climb up again, diversify again? Is it just a matter of starting from scratch, or how are the specific challenges or different opportunities for a country to rebuild?
Can we take another question on this side?
Thank you for the lecture. In a similar vein, if I look at African nations that probably have the resources, they don't have infrastructure, not so competitive on the competitiveness scale, and they want to create jobs for the many youth there. How does this model play? Because typically econ will say, stick to your knitting, what you're good at, where you have resources, but we don't have the infrastructure, so for speed, you're just going to keep exporting if you follow your exporting raw, cheap, unprocessed. So how does the model play in that vein?
Okay, so let me say, at the Growth Lab, we produced one framework to figure out how to prioritize things that we call growth diagnostic. It came out of a paper I did with Danny Roderick and Andres Velasco, who's now the Dean of the School of Public Policy at LSE. And the trick in that paper is very simple. To develop, you need many things. You can make a long list of things. But these things that you need to develop tend to be complements more than substitutes. Complements are things like coffee and sugar. Substitutes are things like coffee and tea. The more coffee you have, the less tea you want. But the more coffee you have, the more sugar you want. And that little trick, that because things are complements, you may have very little sugar and very little coffee. But because you like them in combination, you'll probably run out of coffee before you run out of sugar, or you'll run out of sugar before you run out of coffee. But whoever you run out of first, its price is going to go up. People are going to be desperate for more of it. So if you run out of coffee, you want to pay more for coffee. You may have very little sugar, but given that you have no coffee, you're not going to be willing to pay much for sugar. So you can tell which one is what we call the binding constraint by looking at which things are expensive relative. So we developed a technique to identify binding constraints. And if you want, there's a book online called Doing Growth Diagnostics in Practice that goes through the methods that we use. And we're now going to put one called Doing Growth Diagnostics in Cities that goes through the methods that we use to figure out what is binding in a particular context. So in the case of Venezuela, you might say, well, the problem in Venezuela is that everything is bad, right? You can say education is bad. But you might say education is bad, but is it binding constraint? Because everybody's leaving, right? So it's not that the society is desperate for having more educated people. The educated people don't want to be there, right? So it must be that because something that is a complement to educated people is missing. I would say in the case of Venezuela, what's missing is freedom and rights and the possibility of planning and deciding and carrying your life in a somewhat predictable environment. So I think that if you want to fix Venezuela, you have to start by giving people their rights back. And people with rights, empowered with rights, are going to start, first of all, they'll stop leaving and they'll start imagining things, and other things will start fixing themselves. So I know that it's very, the Washington consensus, for which the London consensus was a response, it was 10 things that you needed to do. And the reaction to the Washington consensus that we wrote in Growth Diagnostics is that it's not really 10. Nobody does 10 things. You really have to figure out which one is the binding constraint and focus on it. I have had the fortune to work on some 50 countries through the Growth Lab. I've had very deep engagements with several African countries, from Ethiopia to South Africa to Namibia and now Malawi, and smaller engagements in other parts of Africa, in Botswana, in Uganda, and Rwanda, in Liberia, and in North Africa. Africa is extremely heterogeneous, and just because it's Africa doesn't mean that, was it Anna Karenina said all happy people are the same, each unhappy person is unhappy in their own ways. There's very different problems in each location. But I'm optimistic that there's a lot of progress to be reaped in the coming years, and that progress is possible. And for example, I'm disappointed at the South Africans, but I was very enthusiastic with the Namibians, and I was quite enthusiastic with the Ethiopians. And so Malawi is in a mess right now, but let's see if we can fix something. Let me say that part of the philosophy of the Growth Lab is that we need to engage. The only way you're going to do good public policy and good research in public policy is if you work with governments. You cannot do good research in public policy by thinking about it, because you learn about the problems of the world by interacting with the world. So our philosophy is that the Growth Lab, our model, is that we say that public policy is to economics or political science or the foundational sciences, as they call, what medicine is to biology. That developments in biology are fantastic for medicine, but you won't go get treated by a biologist. And you don't train a medical doctor the way you train a biologist, and you don't do research in medicine the way you do research in biology. And the way the medical school teaches is with teaching hospitals. And the philosophy of the Growth Lab is that we aspire to be a teaching hospital for growth problems. And that means that we have real patients, we work with real governments. At any point in time, we're in about 8 or 10 countries at the time. And we have real patients, we train people in the process of doing that. And by the way, we don't train people for a year, we train people for 3-4 years after their masters, after their 2 years masters. And we have a bunch of postdocs that are doing the research that you see is a little bit of the kind of research we do. But a lot of the questions that we are researching on our researchy side are the questions that emerge from our analysis. For example, we have another report that's coming out in the next few months on something we call remoteness. What do you do when you're far? You know, we worked on Western Australia, we worked on Kazakhstan, we worked on the state of Wyoming, we worked on the Colombian Amazon. And what do these places have in common? Well, they're just far. In Namibia, they're just far, right? So how do you incorporate into your strategy the fact that you're far? How do you circumvent remoteness? How do you overcome remoteness? What does remoteness hinge on? What are remoteness resilient products? So anyway, we would not have come up with that theme had we not interacted with the world. So we're very gung-ho on the idea that all public policy schools should be anchored by a bunch of teaching hospitals in the different areas that they want to explore. We created a growth lab in the London School of Economics, one in Vienna, one in Mexico. We're setting up one in Montreal and one in Chile. So we are believers in the idea that you cannot do medicine without teaching hospitals. You cannot do public policy without structures that try to emulate teaching hospitals.
So your growth lab monkeys are jumping
Yeah,
various trees
Yes.
around the world.
Yeah.
I think we run out of time. So thanks a lot, Ricardo.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us.